very intense agenda today. And let me start with the traditional schedule of the Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov. On the 3rd of November, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, will meet the Secretary General of the OSCE, who will have his first working visit after he assumed office in July this year. Mr. Greminger will take part in the meeting of the CSTO Standing Council, and they will exchange their views on the OSCE matters and plans on the Secretary General during his period of office, and the preparation for the Council of Ministers of the OSCE in Vienna on the 7th and 8th of December. We know Russia has always been interested in its interaction because the OSCE has always played a role in major international and European matters, and we regard OSCE as a major actor in decreasing the tension and regaining confidence, which is much talked about. And we also pay much attention to transnational challenges to terrorism, drug trafficking, and threats in cybersecurity. We will discuss the prospects of training drug policemen in Russia from Afghanistan and Serbia, and to the settlement of regional conflict in Ukraine, in Transnistria, Nagorno-Karabakh settlement, and also in the framework of Geneva discussions on stability in Transcaucasia. And we hope that the efficiency of the ODIHR and High Commissioner of National Minorities and the representatives on the freedom of the media and field missions will be increased because they are undergoing a systemic crisis, and we hope for renewal of the reform of the OSCE meant to rectify the geographical disbalance in this organization and increasing the transparency, including in the extra budgetary projects. We are going to draw the attention of the Secretary General to the importance of developing the charter of this organization and to the work of its executive structures, and will help us to increase the efficiency in security and cooperation. I'd like to welcome the head of the OSCE Press Service, Madam Pervanova, who accompanies the Secretary General during his visit in Moscow. On the 4th of November, there will be a ceremony of conferring by the foreign ministers to the public awards to foreign citizens. It was conferred according to the order of the presidential order of 9th of October for strengthening the friendship and cooperation, for the cooperation in the rapprochement and mutual enrichment of our nations. And special awards will be conferred to the citizens of the Islamic Republic, Najam Zakharova, the chief doctor of the Najam Hospital, the translator of from Russian to Urdu, the citizen of Hungary, Attila Vidnansky, Mr. Tretyakov, and to the chief editor of Litovsky Courier newspaper. On this 6th and 8th of November, the Minister of international cooperation of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania, Issel Ahmed Aziz Bik, will visit our country. And this is a very important step for the strengthening of our partnership between Russia and Mauritania. And they will discuss current issues of international and regional agenda and exchange views of the situation in North Africa, in the Middle East, in the Sahel regions, and also about the current situation in Syria and other subjects of mutual interest. Special attention will be paid to facilitating bilateral ties, first of all by promoting mutually beneficial cooperation in the sphere of fisheries and facilitating the work of Russian fishermen in the exclusive economic zone of Mauritania. They will also discuss the prospects of bilateral relations and Russia's help for the professional training of Mauritanian personnel, and also the potential for Russian economic operators in the energy and the exploration of hydrocarbon area. On the 8th of November, the foreign minister will take part in the joint meeting of the APEC meeting in Da Nang. This will be a final stage in the preparation for the anniversary 25th summit of the leaders of the APEC, and the ministers are expected to take stock of the issues like the promotion of innovative and comprehensive growth and deepening of regional economic integration and building up human potential in the digital era, and primarily small and medium enterprising, and also those relating to the food security and climate change. Russia will participate actively in discussions with the focus of acquiring by the Asia-Pacific region an indivisible aspect, character. And a special emphasis will be made on the development of the digital economy and the integration of distant remote territories into the regional economic system, and also with an emphasis on security and countering international terrorism. After the meeting, a joint statement will be issued, and a draft leaders' declaration will also agreed upon. As for the bilateral contacts of the Foreign Minister of Russia on the sidelines of the meeting, so it is being elaborated, and we will inform you additionally on that topic. Now, I would like to proceed to other current issues of international agenda and Russian foreign policy, and I'd like to start with the response to the requests of many media for the surge of the Russians being aboard of Mi-8 helicopter near the shores of Spitsbergen. And we will comment on that topic further. And for the present time, Russia is helping in the rescue and search operation. About 40 rescue officials working there, and about 18 divers equipped with submersibles are also submersible equipment working there. They are examining the remnants of the helicopter at the a depth of 209 meters. And a Norwegian large cargo ship is also used to lift the remnants of the helicopters. The investigation into the tragedy was immediately joined by the Russia's investigative committee officials and the Intergovernmental Aviation Committee. They are working closely with the Norwegian colleagues, with the representative of the criminal police, office Kripes, and the embassies. The coordination is executed by the embassy in Oslo and the General Consulate General in Spitsbergen. So they started their work and cooperation with the Norwegian colleagues at the very first moments when they learned about the tragedy. We thank the Norwegian side for their great help. I could have noticed and would like to comment on the publication by the Russian newspaper Moscow Komsomolets. Yesterday there was an article regarding to hundreds of Russians being in prisons in Donetsk, and we have repeatedly stated that the situation regarding the arrested and the detained Russian citizens abroad is being controlled, especially by our foreign ministry. And we cited specific facts and commentaries, gave special commentaries, and the work is still underway. And when this article was being written, so we, the foreign minister, we didn't get any requests from Moskovsky Komsomolets about the clarification of the events. As a rule, the information regarding those detained received from the relatives and friends of the detained is available, and we are working on the sidelines of the Minsk group, and also we get information from the judicial bodies of the Donetsk and Lugansk regions about the citizens that are facing trial. So that permits us to regard this issue in the legal frame. And there were 17 requests of that type that we received. And Russian citizens are still being in prison, and they face their verdicts before 2014. And in any case, it's very important to understand, and I'm saying this seriously, what documents were taken as a basis for saying that 300 Russians are in jail in Donetsk and Lugansk regions, and if the journalists have these kind of data, we would like these data to be provided to us. So we are ready to analyze that kind of information. As for a blogger, Mr. Manekin, by the way, initially we got a question during a briefing about his fate, and we said that we would take necessary steps in that direction, but we didn't so far got any telephone calls, any messages, and Mr. Pushilin was actually arrested in Donetsk And Donetsk confirmed that because he had published not true, fake information about the situation in the Republic. But it was wrong to publish the information about his death. He's not only alive, he's liberated. Whether he's still in the territory of the Donetsk region, I do not have such information, but I would like to stress once again that according to the data that we possess, he is liberated now. As for the other mentioned person in that publication, I wouldn't have said in different other occasions, but I would say now, as for the other Russian citizen,
mentioned in this amateur work, we will try to get further information. I would like to reiterate that we are doing this because we are forced to do so. So I would also like to give a piece of advice to such an important edition as the Moskovsky Komsomolets. Do not go down to such a low level, and I would like to ask you not to make a fool of yourselves. And the most important, do not spread unverified information on the fate of citizens, named citizens. Please ask the Ministry for comments. You know we are always trying to provide it in a timely manner, and we will help you. Moving on. We had a request from several of the media, including network media, on the actions of the Foreign Ministry due to the death on the 27th of October in Shanghai of a Russian citizen Zuba, born in 2002. Taking into account that there were several requests, and this was a very important incident, I would like to talk about it and answer the questions during the briefing. The information that this Russian citizen was hospitalized was received by the Russian Consulate General on the night of the 26th of October. A doctor of the consulate and the employee of the consulate were sent to her. They also contacted the doctors of the Jitsin hospital as well as the model agency who had sent the girl to work in China. Her condition was estimated as heavy. At the same day, due to the complication of her condition, she was transferred to intensive therapy unit. And the hospital was once again visited by the representative of the Russian Consulate General in order to verify that she was receiving all the necessary help. Unfortunately, in spite of the efforts of the medics, on the morning of the 27th of October, she died. And currently, the morgue of the hospital contains the body of the girl, and the Consulate General is taking all efforts to establish the final diagnosis in cooperation with the doctors, and it is carried out on a paid basis. And the situation is complicated by the fact that the model agency that had sent a minor Russian citizen to work abroad did not pay for the required medical insurance, and that is why the Russian diaspora in Shanghai conducted timely work to gather the required money to perform the autopsy and other required procedures. But so far this money is not enough, but the consulate and the community keep working. I would also like to draw your attention to the fact that the girl came to China without the support and attendance of legal representatives, and the Consulate General in Shanghai keeps a close eye on the situation and provides all the necessary aid to the relatives of the girl in providing the documents and paperwork and in repatriating the body. I would also like to draw your attention to this tragic piece of news in order to once again raise the question of the importance of the paperwork for going abroad, of medical insurance, and of course, especially when we're talking about minors. Now, moving on to other matters on the international agenda and the development of the situation in Syria, I would like to inform you about it. The situation in Syria and around it remains positive, with the key role of the Russian armed forces. The bulwark of international terrorism on Syrian land is being eliminated, and Moscow continues supporting Damascus in stabilizing the military and political situation and the creation of a good atmosphere in the Syrian society to eliminate the consequences of a long internal conflict. As for the Russian initiative to call the Congress for Syrian National Dialogue, it is currently being elaborated, actively elaborated, and for the details of the Congress, namely the time, the date, and the number of participants, you will be informed later. As we think the delegates of the Congress will face a difficult task of creating a basis for the restoration of unity of all ethnic and confessional and political entities of the Syrian society, its traditional institutions, the ordinary citizens should join the efforts in the establishment of normal political life in the country to define the contours of future statehood. It is our conviction that the Congress of Syrian National Dialogue could promote the transfer of the Resolution 2254 of the UN Security Council on political settlement and promote the political negotiation process under the auspices of the UN in Geneva. We continue fight against terrorism, and Syria managed to prevent a terrorist attack in Latakia. During an examination of one of the cars, 50 kilograms of explosives were located in the car. And in the Jobar region, the militants of the Faylaq ar-Rahman destroyed a tunnel with Syrian military and 15 soldiers were killed. And recently, the militants shelled and they harassed the city. They also shelled the Damascus neighborhoods of Shagur and Abbasin, and the mine explosives that in the school in Jezrina, to the west of Damascus, killed 6 pupils. In the south of Damascus, the situation remains quiet after several days of violent fights between the ISIS forces of the Palestinian camp of Yarmouk and the Hamas militants. This allowed the Syrian Society of Red Crescent to deliver to the camp as well as to the neighboring neighborhoods of Babila and Beit Sahm their humanitarian and product aid. But due to the continuing sporadic shootings, the UN humanitarian convoy had to turn back. In the east of the country, the government forces continue clearing up the last remaining ISIS-controlled neighborhoods in Deir ez-Zor. The neighborhoods of Havija, Sakar and the industrial zones in the east of the city have been fully liberated, as well as the Sakar island on the Euphrates River. The Syrian armed forces have expanded the control zone around the oil pumping station T2 in the southeast of the province of Deir ez-Zor. It is supposed that the offensive of the Syrian army to the last forepost of ISIS in the province of Abu Kemal will take place parallel with the advancement of the Iraqi army in the territory of Iraq and the border pass point of Al-Qaim. We welcome the coordination between Iraqi and Syrian forces in the fight against terrorism in the border regions of Iraq and Syria. The Kurds acting on the east coast of Euphrates have declared the liberation of Al Busayr to the northeast of Deir ez-Zor and assuming the control of the second largest oil field in Syria at Tanak. The Russian military continue regularly providing humanitarian aid to the Syrian population, and overall, since the start of the operation of the Russian air forces in Syria, they have passed more than 2,254 tons of humanitarian aid. The Russian military and patriotic public movement Young Army has gathered 950 school backpacks with all the stationery which were delivered by Russian air transport to Syria, and in September 2017 they were passed to the children of Syria. And Russian civil society also does its best. And we often inform you about the actions of the non-governmental organizations in Russia who provide the required humanitarian aid to the Syrian people. And today I would like to talk to you about the following story. The pupils of the school number 1238 took part in providing humanitarian aid and gathered the required stationery for the Syrian children, which were already passed to the pupils in Syria. During the period of the presence of the Russian forces in Syria, with the participation of the Russian military, 178 schools and 35 kindergartens have been restored. Moreover, the representatives of the Russian Center for Reconciliation in Syria have provided medical aid to 380 children, and 14 children have been taken for treatment to Russia. We call on all those who are interested in the establishment of peace in Syria to provide active support for Syrians in their search for the ways to settle the conflict, including sending additional humanitarian aid to the regions of the country which have suffered the most from the war. Now, moving on to another region, we continue keeping a close eye on the situation in the Republic of South Sudan. It is apparent that the current internal conflict in this state is the result of the American geopolitical project to separate South Sudan from Sudan. As a result of the international and African community now have to deal with an internal interethnical conflict in a young South Sudanese state, which is very hard to settle. The continuing military and political crisis that started in December 2013 in South Sudan has already resulted in serious humanitarian consequences. The number of internally displaced persons equals 3.5 million people. The number of South Sudanese refugees in the neighboring countries is 2 million people, and almost 7.5 million people require urgent humanitarian aid. We are convinced that solid peace in South Sudan will be brought not by the threats of sanctions that are now often said by Western countries, but rather progress in political settlement. And in this context, we hope for the success of the White National Dialogue initiated by President Kiir. It's important that South Sudanese opposition should make the necessary mutual steps. We support the peacekeeping efforts of the African community, first of all the East African Intergovernmental Organization for Development, to provide peace, stability and security in South Sudan. We also consider as very useful the initiative of the organization to conduct in December an international forum to relaunch the peace agreement signed by South Sudan in 2015. We proceed from the fact that the deployment in South Sudan of regional forces of protection under the auspices of the aforementioned organization will be performed with the respect of the sovereignty of the Republic of South Sudan and with the respect of the basic principles of peacekeeping. Now, moving on to the situation in Kenya, in accordance with the previous decisions of the Kenyan Supreme Court on the 26th of October, new elections took place in the country, and in accordance with the results announced by the Independent Election Commission, the victory goes to the acting president, who got more than 98% of the vote. His main opponent, the leader of the opposition National Super Alliance, Raila Odinga, withdrew from the election and called to boycott the elections. Due to the actions of the oppositions in 4 out of 47 districts of the country, the voting did not take place. According to the declaration of the observers from African Union, the East African Community and the International Intergovernmental Organization for Development, the elections were conducted in accordance with the Constitution and the electoral laws of Kenya. Moscow notes the eagerness of the elected president to national dialogue, and we hope that this long election process will allow all the political forces to work together on social and economic tasks of the Kenyan society. Yes, I can see that Russia Today would like to ask a question.
You can ask your question after my opening remarks. Thank you very much. Moving on, and on the question that we regularly receive from the Japanese media, I would like to inform you on the details of the second Japanese business delegation to the South Kurils. On October 26 and 30th, the second visit of the Japanese officials and businessmen to the Kuril Islands took place to examine the potential for mutual economic activity. The first trip took place on June 27 and ended in July the 1st. The current visit focused on discussing practical ways to implement joint projects in 5 fields agreed on by 2 leaders in Vladivostok: mariculture, wind energy, hothouse farming, waste recycling, and package tours. Officials and relevant businessmen on both sides had a thorough discussion on all of these fields. The discussions were mainly focused on concrete commercial and technical parameters of possible cooperation in the mentioned spheres, especially with regard to the experience of the Sakhalin businesses and the implemented bilateral projects in other regions of our country. We assess the results of the second round of the business missions positively. They provide enough material for joint analysis and for further work to implement top-level agreements on mutual economic activity in the Kurils. This work will be continued by 2 working groups on trade and logistic questions. They were built up within the main negotiation mechanism at the level of the deputy foreign ministers. By the way, today Moscow is hosting preparatory meetings of the group's heads on the Russian and the Japanese side. The details I will convey additionally further. And well, considering the interest to the Russian-Japanese relation, detailed interest, I'm preparing thoroughly, and I would like to say that November the 2nd, the Russian foreign minister, the Japanese representatives had talks with the representative of the Russian ministry. They discussed current issues of the bilateral relations, including the agreements of 2 leaders in developing practical cooperation and the schedule of the further political contacts. And now I would like to focus, unfortunately, on the Russian-American relations. But why unfortunately? There is few constructive things in these relations. I would like to see some positive trends. It's high time. But we were not surprised by the new sanctions of the United States. I mean, the publication on the guidance on restrictions against the Russian businesses and the precise instructions of participation in international oil and gas projects engaging Russian companies. In fact, these moves bring little change for Russia. Our economy long ago managed to work under such conditions, and we profit from them, as a powerful incentive was given to whole industries, and Russia is diversifying its trade relations. This opens up new possibilities for us. Unfortunately, the American authorities continue to block long-term contracts and beneficial contracts for their companies. Paradoxically, the United States, once promoting themselves as the paragon of market economy, are increasingly going down to direct economic governance. For political reasons, the USA sacrifices the interests of business, and it deprives America of new working places and hinders economic growth, and so on. Sure, we regret Washington's policy to further worsen the bilateral relations. It's a short-sighted policy which is fraught with negative aftermath that can backfire the United States. For example, it was really embarrassing the prohibition of the cooperation with the Russian special services. It obviously reduces the opportunities of the joint struggle against terrorism. This move seems this blockade of the security services cooperation seems to be reckless amid the murderous raid of an ISIS adherent on October the 31st in New York. It was staged not far away from the monument to the victims of 9/11, and we have sincere sympathy with relatives of the killed and wounded, and we have no other words except the words of support and sympathy. We would like to point out that the American public should ask why the U.S. Congress, passing the law on countering U.S. enemies by sanctions in the summer of the previous year, is looking for enemies in the wrong place. We hope that in the course of time Washington will abandon the current Russia bashing and understand the flaws and futility of confrontation and pressure on us. The quicker it happens, the better it will be for Americans. You know that yesterday the Council of Federation hosted another reading on pressing on the RT and Sputnik from the United States, specifically banning their ad accounts in the social network Twitter. I would like to move to this theme. As you know, the ban was imposed on October the 26th by the administration of Twitter. We use this social network and we thoroughly consider the reaction on this move. We are witnessing a growing resentment within the Twitter community against the nonsense of the managers of this company. The censors of this social network are fairly sad to neglect hundreds openly, for example, extremist and fascist accounts, and they oppress only those accounts of the Russian media. We also have noted the statements by honest US and European experts and politicians who condemned the decision by the Twitter management and considered it an infringement of the freedom of speech. I would like to draw your attention to a very important fact. It was Twitter that in 2016 sent to the RT office a business offer on ad cooperation worth up to more than $3 million during this took place before and in the full swing of the US election campaign. As RT didn't want to place this expensive ad, Twitter demonstrated remarkable insistence and conducted a special presentation for RT employees. But even afterwards, this proposal was rejected for commercial reasons. And you know what happened later from Margarita Simonyan. In our opinion, this ban demonstrates Twitter's economic weakness and its absolute dependence on security elites of the United States that directly controls decision-making in this company. As we now see it, we call on all users of the social network to make conclusions. Today, Twitter banned the ad by Russia Today and Sputnik, and tomorrow, following the changing political situation, the media or companies cooperating with Twitter in any other country can be declared to be the American enemies.
точно так же, как телекомпания Rush Today могут до этого вкладывать деньги в рекламные кампании или какие-то совместные проекты. И за свои же деньги затем получат
they can receive these laws. And one more remark, according to Twitter, in 2016, RT spent more than $200,000 on ad in this social network, but during this electoral campaign of 2016, for example, according to some estimates, there are some of them, the candidates received donations worth dozens and hundreds of millions of dollars. In this respect, a question arises: how, considering those, in this respect, a question arises: how, considering those sums, the Russian channel could meddle in the election and influence its outcome? We consider this move as another effort of the U.S. administration to eliminate alternative source of information that is annoying for American elites. Here belongs the intention of the U.S. authorities to list these Russian companies as foreign agents, and our consideration of this list shows that it lists currently companies that do not produce independent media content, or they cite other materials or lobby for the vested interests. Freedom of speech has always been the building element of the U.S., and we hope that it's not just a mere assertion, but we see the contrary situation now. Moving on, November the 7th, 2017, at the Tajik village Tuda will host ceremonial opening of the monument to Red Army soldiers. The reconstruction was conducted at the personal cost of the villagers. We see it as an example of how carefully the Tajik public treats our common history, and we are resenting another act of vandalism against the Soviet monument in Sofia. The vandals attacked spoiled monument just a week ago, but now they did even more. They placed anti-Semite motifs on the memorial. This wickedness seems to be especially cynical, as during World War II our soldiers could prevent deportation of Jews from Bulgaria, thus saving some 50,000 people from inescapable death. But the most terrible is not desecration itself, but the most terrible in this respect is the fact that those who desecrate monuments are not even aware of their own history. These things I mentioned are not only valuable, they are significant for those who know history, and they will never afford such things. Those who come to desecrate the monuments unfortunately don't know history at all. They don't even know some glorious moments of their own history. We are convinced that these criminal acts will never meet response and sympathy among most Bulgarians, and we insisting on that Bulgaria finally do whatever is necessary to prevent desecration of the memory of the Soviet soldiers who sacrificed their lives to save the European continent from Nazism. And moving on the events in some capitals, for example, in Europe, with the participation of the Russian cities. On October the 25th, at the London Underground station Baker Street, the Heart of Russia train was launched. Its design reflects the achievements in science and culture, and this event was timed to 2017 bilateral year of science and education, and it was conducted and financed by the administration of the city of Moscow. The project also involves 25 outdoor ads and a mobile app. The train is expected to run along 3 lines until the end of 2017. This event aroused vivid interest among city dwellers and tourists, and we expect that these
bilateral humanitarian ties, and I would like to say that the same events are organized by the British Council. And in Portugal, Petersburg meetings were organized upon the initiative of the government of St. Petersburg. It was an educational and cultural event in Porto. The main objective is to promote the Russian language, culture, and education. Certain events were organized in other cities. The highlight of the program was the leading opera singers concert from St. Petersburg in House of Music Porto. These meetings were favorably received by Russian compatriots who took part in the preparations for this project, and therefore there is a proposal to organize the same events in Algarve in 2018-2019. In Mexico, from the 19th to the 22nd of October, the Autonomous University of Narita hosted the annual national meeting of Russian teachers from Mexico. It was organized by the Mexican Association of Russian Teachers, other organizations of Russian compatriots, ambassador, and the Federal Agency for the Commonwealth of Independent States and compatriots living abroad. It was also hosted by the Russian ambassador, president of the association, and the university rector. The program included presentations on the Russian educational system, and they provided full information about government scholarship programs. The program included seminars on career development and poetry reading competitions, Russian music concerts, and photo exhibitions. Today's Russia. Young Mexicans are vividly interested in Russian history, cultural language, and education. Also, they mentioned with satisfaction the fact that Mexicans get a lot of scholarships. In the academic year 2016-2017, 25 scholarships were granted to Mexican citizens. For the academic year of 2017-2018, 50 scholarships will be provided. Also, this event was organized by the government of the state and the governor of the state, mayor of state's capital, Tepic City. This event was widely covered in local media, and such conferences are held by the federal agency and the Fund Russian World with the participation of local authorities and special purpose organizations. These forums promote Russian language and Russian culture and Russian education abroad. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Governmental Committee on Compatriots Living Abroad support this work because they think that they strengthen humanitarian bilateral relations between the Russian Federation and other countries, and they also grant the right for Russian-speaking communities to get their training in the Russian language. Also, we took notice of the report about the situation of rights of migrants in other European countries that was published in September this year, we have noticed that the situation is quite severe because of the severe circumstances is going on in Italy and in Greece. The same situation is observed in Spain, Sweden and France, because there they liquidate illegal refugee camps. The agency register other cases of hatred in Sweden, Finland, the Netherlands, Germany, in Austria. There remain acute concerns in the EU about rights of migrant children. The International Organization for Migration also paid attention to the fact that there are no people who protect rights of children, migrants, while we see cases of disappearance of children, and we have told about it many times. The problem of trafficking in persons remains unsolved. According to the UNICEF report and the IOM report, there are 77% of children who become victims. These are the children who use the Mediterranean Channel to reach Europe. These facts given in the report once again demonstrate the problem and the inability of the European Union to elaborate consolidated policy on immigration. They don't want to be responsible for providing assistance to refugees and forced migrants. The European countries just try to reduce their numbers, and they put refugees at risk, and they even deny protection to them guaranteed by international law. Therefore, we consider useful to remind that the situation with migrants in Europe is a result of responsible intervention in domestic affairs of Middle East and Northern Africa states, and this is because of the forced change of undesirable regimes. Because of that, there are humanitarian disasters and rise of terrorism, and therefore there are unbearable conditions, living conditions, because there is threat to life and violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms, which caused massive flows of migrants and refugees. Therefore, it looks ambiguous, the idea promoted by the European Union in the United Nations and other international organizations to devise responsibility for refugees and migrants. And finally, another material that I need to talk about, and it's quite sarcastic, but it's a sad news. We took notice about the news that was published in a French portal that was an open letter to the mayor of Paris to rename the Alexander III Bridge. The campaign was headed by the liberal artist and actor Terry Paul and Valette. The letter was based on the petition, which was signed by 1,400 people. According to the supporters of the idea, the idea of this bridge contradicts republic values. We are sure that this bridge is a symbol of the friendship between France and Russia and symbolizes the alliance that was concluded between Russia and France in the end of the 19th century. And if we follow the logic of these people, then we have to change the name of many villages, streets and cities that are named after many heroes and kings like Henry IV and Joan of Arc. If the true motives of these people is a concealed Russophobia, then we have to disappoint them, because they can speak to linguists and they will find out that there are many words in the Russian and foreign languages that share the same root. They'll know about the strong and mutual influence of Russian and French cultures have on each other. One petition cannot destroy cultural and spiritual heritage of our countries. Now, I'm ready to answer your questions.
Могли бы воспользоваться микрофоном
Could you please use the microphone
и нажать кнопку.
and press the button, please?
Новое время Еревана.
Новое время, new time in English. So we would like to talk about the question of Ministerial Council of the OSCE. So could you please clarify what they're going to talk about? So you're going to talk about the meeting of Lavrov. No, we're not talking about ministerial meeting. It will be organized later. Well, you said that they will discuss security matters and of course, they will discuss the Nagorno-Karabakh settlement process. I have a question about consensus plan that should be discussed in the course of the meeting. I just need to understand what they are going to talk about. Consensus -1, consensus -2, what Russia is going to propose. You know, I think tomorrow we are going to inform you about all the matters that were discussed and all the modalities. So we have specified all the issues that will be discussed, but all the details you will know later. It's up to Sergei Lavrov and his colleague, Secretary General of OSCE, to talk about it. Yes, please. Turkish TV channel. Ms. Zakharova, we have received information about the death of Russian servicemen after the terrorist attack on southeastern region of Turkey. We are saddened by this fact. The ministry has recently published the list of of people who are going to take part in the national dialogue in Sochi. No. It will be organized at the 18th of November. I'm sorry, but I need to interrupt you. I think that you were not quite attentive when you were listening to what I was saying. I've just said about it. We are working on all the modalities and details of this event. As for dates, as for place, and all the participants, you will know about it later. It was just the start point of our work, but at the same time, I would like to know what's the difference between Russia's position towards all these groups, like a Democratic Alliance of Kurdistan that closely works with others. What's your difference between your position and the American position? You know, I'm not a specialist in this on this matter. I'm going to ask experts about it and now provide you detailed comment on this matter. But in general, to my mind, it's up to the experts to answer your question. But once again, in general, the Russian Federation intends to engage Kurds in the political consensus or the work that is going to result in certain results. We're not going to manipulate people. We're not going to manipulate ethnic, religious characteristics of communities that work in Syria, and this question is quite sensitive for them. We're not talking about manipulation once again. We are going to engage them in this process, and we have already explained why we want to do this, because we want to restore the Syrian state, because all the communities should be engaged in this process. No one should be remained on the sidelines. You know that every day, every month, Russian representatives on all the levels said about the necessity to engage the Kurdish population, especially political groups, different communities and civic organizations in the process on different platforms, and we are doing all the best. You know, our efforts are blocked by Western partners, but not only the Western partners, but also other partners. We have mentioned that these interests are lobbied to serve the interests of the future Syrian government, but also the whole Syrian region. I don't want to comment the U.S. position, but sometimes we do it. But to my mind, we can talk about manipulations. Unfortunately, we're talking about manipulations for political reasons. And in general, I would like to pay attention to the Russian approach to this issue. But once again, I'm going to ask this question to the experts who are going to analyze in every detail your question. We're talking about anti-Russia sanctions imposed by the United States against the Russian defense sector. So we would like to welcome you, and we would like to start with you the cooperation in this sector. Especially would like to discuss the supplies of S-400, how Russia is going to retaliate on these sanctions. You know, bearing in mind our cooperation with Turkey, we consider Turkey as an independent state, and so we think that our cooperation has certain challenges, but at the same time has great prospects. And this cooperation includes many other actors, but it's in our interest to strengthen cooperation with Turkey, and that's what we are doing. If we have certain challenges, we try to address them, and we try to use all the mechanisms of our cooperation. As for the fact how this cooperation is perceived by other actors, you know, it's up to the international community to assess. So we take into account regional and international agenda and the security matters in the region. So we try to maintain the dialogue with Turkey, and we don't conceal it from anyone else. But once again, we value this cooperation, and it shouldn't be influenced by external actors. Unfortunately, we have already witnessed that we have influenced how other actors try to exert influence on our bilateral decisions, but we just need to learn the lesson, and we need to develop our relations and to do all the best to prevent the negative influence. Well, I totally support the positive influence, but not the negative one.
Good afternoon. I have told you everybody about Kurds. Okay, now we're going to talk about the Arabs. The Iraqi government informed us that they have not attained the aims of negotiations. That's why they expect the continuation of war with Kurdistan. Could you please comment the current position of Russia on the situation? Okay, it's not the final position, it's the position we had and we have now, so the position coincides on all the steps of this dialogue. We are for the dialogue between the participants, between the Kurds and others. You see that it's very easy to unleash a conflict, an internal conflict. Sometimes it's because of external influence, and then it's very difficult to attain peace. That's why, from the very beginning, we said that this problem should be resolved, taking into account the mutual interests inside Iraq. Next question, please. Geraint Pearl, Federal Agency of News. I would like to inform you, yes, you did it maybe 2 hours ago. Okay, so I'll inform everybody here about it. So we are politically censored by the Google Corporation. In particular, all the news of our site were deleted from the search engine. I would like to ask you what are the causes of this aggression, and maybe count on the Ministry's support in the settlement of this situation. You know, I think that in this case, you, first of all, should do one thing. It's just an advice. First of all, you should inform Google and send a special notice to them. They have a Moscow office. They have some good experts there, and you should ask them why are they doing it, what are their motives. That's the first step. And the second step you are to take is to send the same official letters to Russian authorities that deal with the issues of protecting Russian media. That is what we are to do according to the law. And they also deal with all technical aspects of the rights of Russian media on the territory of Russian Federation and abroad. I know that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has already received your inquiry. I may confirm it, and we, on our side, will ask Google on their motivation, and we will send inquiries to international structures, international institutes, and I think that the representatives of OSCO I mentioned today should know about the situation. But to my mind, we have the briefing today on international politics and foreign politics, but I think you should send a letter asking to clarify the situation to Roskomnadzor. Now we together want our interests to be in the media, so not only in private organizations, but also including our influence from the forces of different countries, for example, in the United States. So we see it practically every day. If the information is that you were blocked on political motives and it is confirmed, it's a precedent for special doing on this situation. So we have received your inquiry and we are elaborating on it. Next question, please. Ms. Zakharova, yesterday you were on the Federation Council on protecting our media sovereignty. Your colleagues talked about our possible retaliation in informational sphere against our American partners. So we have been talking about it today. Maybe you will unveil the secret and tell us what are the concrete measures we are going to take. Will we ban Hillary Clinton on Vkontakte or what? So you remember, it's like Vladimir Vinokur told us, you may not tell it, but it will be a secret. Okay, it will be a secret. You should understand one thing. We do not want any bloody retaliation against American media or other media. We actually understand this situation, and we just are becoming more professional. So these countermeasures and this infringement on the activities of journalists are not our aim. It's 100%. But I would say that we are not pleased to deal with this situation at all. It consumes our time, our efforts, and we may do our main work instead of it. But the retaliation, when we are talking about crossing all the red lines and about the fighting without rules should be applied. It's a kind of fighters club, so sometimes we are blackmailed, and that's why the relations should follow. To discuss today what will be the measures, it's not a good idea, because we're not pleased about it at all. Are they elaborated? Of course they are. Will they be applied in response to the fact that, for example, the activities of RT in the United States are blocked? Yes, they will be applied, and everybody spoke about it. I mean, all the representatives of relevant authorities spoke about it. It's a comprehensive position of the Russian Federation. We have never taken such steps, but today we are talking about a case without precedent. We had some examples of extradition of Russian journalists from different countries. Sometimes it happens, and we had some countermeasures, but we considered it as quite a unique cases, so cases that happened. As for the general blocking of the work of the Russian media, not the accreditation, non-authorization, or limit of access to some events. It also happened, but we never reacted to it. For example, when our media didn't get a permission to participate in an event in Europe, they were not accredited. We haven't had any countermeasures. It's not our own aim, and it doesn't please us at all. But I would reiterate, in this case, we will have to do it. Next question, please. Boris. Okay, I'm listening to you. Good afternoon. I would like to tell you about the monuments in Bulgaria. You said that everybody has its black sheep, and they said that the soldiers will go to the other side in the Second World War as the music changes. It's about the relationship between Bulgaria and Russia and about journalism. You know that journalism is a dangerous work, and recently on Malta, a journalist investigating a great affair died. Iraqi Kurdistan actually saw the killing of the Kurdish journalist, and his relatives sent me his photos. He was brutally killed. Actually, they cut his tongue, and put the knife to his mouth so that he keep silence. And they did it at his home. Recently, a Bulgarian journalist, Tatiana Ritanjieva, investigated in Bulgaria about the case that Azerbaijan used diplomatic planes in order to transfer arms to the Middle East and Saudi Arabia. She published the investigation in one of Bulgarian newspapers, and then she couldn't work anymore. Sometimes the news coming from Russia are perceived as direct propaganda in the European Union. What news are you talking about? What news are the threat to the European Union? You know, sometimes it happens, and now we have a question: how should we act? When in London you have the trains on Russian culture, is it a threat to the European Union? Where are our threats? Where are our actions that are perceived as a threat to the European Union? In particular, in our press, we have the news from Russia. Okay, it's a different situation. And they say that's the direct Russian propaganda. So here I have a question. Maybe we should cooperate on culture, arts. in the future? Are you inviting me to a performance in the theater? Okay, yes, I am. I will participate with great pleasure. It's a big issue, if we are talking seriously. I don't understand why you talk together about the threat to life of journalists and the issues of Russian image in the media, for example, in Bulgaria. I would answer separately. As for the first question, you're right. The journalists' work is dangerous. We all know about it. That's why in some international organizations they have the special institute and the special ombudsman to these issues. They have some resolutions, etc. It's about OSCE, the Council of Europe, UNESCO, the United Nations, non-government organizations, and many, many others. But I think it's first of all a question to you, to the professional community. And I think that today we may not only speak about the dangerous aspects of journalists' work, but also on the public issues and going on to public as of a factor that may cause potential aggression against a person, as a person is a celebrity, it's a known person. There are bloggers and people who write articles and have many followers, and great attention is driven to their posts and their materials. I think that today the problem is wider than it was 10 years ago. New media give us the possibility to become popular in non-traditional media, so it's a global issue. And besides, it's an issue on the estimation of threats and evaluation of threats, both political, personal, that are related to the public character of journalists' work. And there are other nuances and aspects of the issue. So it's all about the discussing of all these nuances in professional community. And for the Russian Federation, everything that relates to freedom of speech and protection of journalism is a priority. Unfortunately, in our country, we have the cases of attacks on journalists on different reasons, and they are priority issues to be investigated. Actually, these attacks are linked with their work, with their professional activities, with the fact that they are public persons, and it's under the control of the state. So now I don't see what your question is, but I think that you're right, and we do all this in international forums, and we follow the rules and legislation of our country. As for the second question on the Russian news and how they are perceived in other countries, I agree that not everything coming from Russia, I mean from the state authorities, is perceived as propaganda. But sometimes it's what they want to demonstrate and to show. And recently, they accuse us of creating a machine to produce fake news. We are open to collaborate on this issue. If you have some examples of spreading false news and false information, we are ready to discuss all this fake news. We haven't actually received any materials on this topic. And, of course, the journalists have the right to make a mistake and the right to correct their mistake. Russia Today and other media have made some mistakes, but they published that they have do it. So we do not have any machine on fake news and the propaganda. Actually, it's a fake news we are offended of, accused of. As for humanitarian issues, culture and arts, this is Rosa Trudnictvo that deals with this issue, and also some other relevant authorities. I would like to tell you about what's going on these areas, and I will do it In summer, we went to the Crimea together. Okay, don't tell everything. I have a question. Despite the European sanctions, and actually I laughed at it, I saw a big European shop, Metro, that continued its activities despite the sanctions, and the French Auchan as well. Could you comment on it, please? Or maybe I'm too naive and I do not understand the sense of it. So you should look when they were founded, then when they created their business in Russia. What do you want? That they do not deliver anything to Russia and to the Crimea? We also saw the energy blockade of the Crimea, and we have surpassed this blockade. I hope you understand what we did to provide energy to the peninsula in order to solve this problem. We constantly face information blockade of the peninsula, and of course the situation of the fact that the citizens of the Crimea do not receive the visas to enter to some countries. It's a blockade of freedom of movement. So I'm sure we can call it a blockade. Today, we are the witnesses of another example related to your colleagues. Crimean journalists were not admitted to the event connected to OSCE. They were credited to this event, but they haven't received visas from the Austrian party. It's the first case when the journalists, not the people who were sent to the event and who want to become journalists, they remain in the Crimea and they work there. Actually, these people are really journalists. When they want to come to an international forum and to talk on the situation, being its eyewitnesses, and this situation is discussed in Europe, and so in this case they cannot come, they are not permitted to come there, and it's a real blockade. How do we manage in this situation? We have online bridges. You know, it's a bridge that happened yesterday in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. On the OSCE platform, they will have a video audience, and they will have a possibility to present their ideas. But it's a real blockade. So everything you're talking about is to be perceived, and we should study these particular examples. We know that the Crimea has some problems, some issues, and we do not want to make them a secret. We tell you, come yourself and see what's going on there. Talk to non-governmental organizations, special authorities, human rights organizations. Take this information from the people who live there. But all the reports are published based on the information of non-governmental organizations that never were there, and these people who never were there evaluate the situation today, and it should be perceived as a surprise and something wrong, not the shops that sell some products. You should be surprised by the fact that a number of Western capitals is actively engaged in anti-agitation against Crimea. They send special notes to the embassies, write letters, make tourist operators not sell packages to these countries. They spread some fake information on what's going on. And I think it should be perceived as a surprise and misunderstanding. But it's not the last case we are going to the Crimea with you. You invited me to the theater and I invite you to the Crimea.
Just one question about the terror attack that took place in New York and in other places. There is Uzbek influence in this, and it looks similar to the terror attacks that happened in our place in Paris and St. Petersburg. But it cannot happen that countering terrorism could unite again the United States of America and Russia, which are not really united as we heard today. And what is your assessment of this situation? I'm kind of confused with your assessment. What is happening in the European Union? Italy is in the European Union, or maybe you are also leaving it. We cannot choose our neighbors anyway, but you can choose the alliance. So your evaluation is very interesting. As for your question about Catalonia, I could use your question and once again to state our position that hasn't been changed. It is still the same. It is still consistent position of the ministry. And while I would like to start answering your question on cooperation on counter-terrorism issues, you remember very well the massacre, the terror attack, and a lot of victims in the United States of America when the case of Tsarnaevs took place, and that caused a lot of victims. And I would like to remind you, long before the attack itself, the special services of the Russian Federation and the American colleagues, the Russian special services sent to Americans the information about the activities of Tsarnaevs that they are doing in the territory of the United States, and this information was sent not in the volume of multiple documents where this information was hidden somewhere among the documents. It was a targeted information specifically on this issue. And this information was submitted to them directly. And moreover, our colleagues from the Russian special services paid special attention of our American counterparts. Despite the fact that Russia gave the exact facts and tried to draw the attention and focus the attention of the Americans in this issue, we received a very interesting answer that we shouldn't bother. We shouldn't worry about this. Everything is under control. There is no need in Russia's assistance. This is approximately what was the answer that we received from our American colleagues. For that moment, we were not trying to interfere in the internal affairs of that state. We just proposed our assistance, but if they didn't need it, so I would like to repeat again, if they rejected our help, we were not insisting. It doesn't correspond to the spirit of to the vein of realization of such activities. So we clearly understood that the developments of the situation and the cooperation on this issue with Russia, the US, is not interested. Then the attack took place, and you remember all too well the details of this attack. And this is an example of how Russia really tries by all possible means, despite anything, to establish a productive or, well, at least some cooperation with our Western colleagues in on the issues of countering terrorism. We are discussing this on multiple forums and conferences. We take resolutions, we elaborate documents, but we express our desire in a very constructive way. We would like to establish a meaningful dialogue. We would like to consolidate our efforts to move to practical activities from mere resolutions and words. Today, international terrorism has changed. Terrorists today do not need planes, they do not need explosive even. They do not need any special tools in order to conduct what they plan. They just need what we have, the car, the vehicle that anyone has, even normal citizens, that is not going to break any rules. That is why it makes even more complicated the situation with search and preventative activities on these issues. If before there were a lot of extremists and terrorists who used special tools, they prepared explosive bombs, they organized groups. Today, life of those terrorists who committed terror attacks in New York and Nizza and Paris, it's still the same as life of normal citizens. That is why we come back to the necessity to detailed and meaningful cooperation on country level. But it was blocked by London, and it is in a very bad condition on the direction of cooperation with the United States. Our cooperation with NATO on counterterrorism must be full-fledged, complete, the way it was originally meant to be, but it was also blocked. Every briefing, or every second briefing, we repeat this. The President, Minister of Foreign Affairs speak about it, the representatives of special services of the Russian Federation. We send the signals to public community, and we all the time, maybe it was the terror attacks in Paris when we said that those events must be not just the reason to express our solidarity and sympathy, but it must be a lesson that should unite us, make us consolidate our efforts. And what we see, the media and even some of our journalists were wise enough to say that Russia and Russian representatives are hypocrites, and they are painting in the colors of the national flags their avatars, and they are, well, performing different activities that was expected from them. So we do understand that the reflection of support, like changing the avatars on social networks, really shows our sympathy. We need the public activities that show our support. We have to organize massive events on the streets, but it is kind of a disease that must be cured. And the medicine to cure this is the activities through our special services, and we really want to be heard, and we really want the situation to be changed, and they stop searching the enemies where they do not exist. As for Catalonia, just 1 second. I can say just once again that our position on this issue hasn't changed. It is a traditional position that was announced long before the referendum in Catalonia and was repeated once and once again. We believe that it is internal affair of Spain, and the further developments in this region of Spain will happen in line with the constitution of the country, current legislation with respect to the democratic norms and human rights. We believe that the early parliamentarian elections on 21st of December will be a critical step to overcome crisis and will stabilize the state and local institutions. Yes, but use the mic, please. It shows that the answer to our question was unprepared. Do you have any doubts? Maria Vladimirovna, Japanese Information Agency, you said that we can ask questions, and I'm asking for all our Japanese colleagues. The first thing, when was it that you couldn't ask the questions? So you said that we can ask all the questions today. Something went wrong. Do we have a translator for the representative? Oh, you understand Russian? Sorry. So it's funny here. So my question, there was the second Japanese business mission. Will the third business mission be organized? I know that these are just plans. I mean, the meeting of Minister Lavrov, but maybe they have already agreed to meet with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan, and now we heard about the meeting to Korea. Maybe Minister of Foreign Affairs can help in preparing this visit. We have a plan of visit to Japan, and Mr. Kono will have negotiations with Mr. Lavrov and will participate in the Council on Trade Issues. The details, including the dates, will be announced later. Yes, please.
Eurasia Daily News Agency. A question regarding the influence from the West towards Serbia, since Mr. Vučić announced a new phase of the dialogue on Kosovo. Can Russia change its position regarding Kosovo if the position of Serbia changes? This is a very interesting question. This issue has been discussed for many years, and from the time of the possible separation from Kosovo from Serbia. And at that time, this issue was discussed regularly by the press, and the journalists were in the know of all the details. Now we have just the topic of Kosovo, and what is the exact position of each state has been forgotten, and no one has abolished the resolution, the UN resolution which the Russian Federation advocates. From our point of view, this resolution is active. It is a document that should be complied with, and we didn't have any other variants. There were no proposals, neither from Serbia nor other international actors. But the first voice to be heard is from Belgrade. And that's why we are just basing on this very international document, and we don't have double standards in that regard. So our position is quite coherent, and we don't have any discrepancies in that, in our position. So it is a consistent one. Yes, please. ABC News. I would like to ask you about the criticism from the United States that Russia is aiding and abetting the North Korea, and Transtelecom broadcasting agency also dwelt upon this issue. I can say that the relations between Russia and North Korea are being developed at the time, and we comply with the sanctions resolution of the UN Security Council, adopted with the participation of our country. In those resolutions, we we played an active role, and that's how we shape our position in that regard. As for the United States or other countries, in comparison to their stance, we do not have double standards or widening interpretation, and we cleave to the sanctions resolution, and Russia is making its own decisions in accordance with the presidential orders, and it doesn't contradict any Security Council resolutions. And but at the same time, we're developing our ties with North Korea. Sometimes our position is perverted, and it is viewed, and they try to present it in strange colors. And as for the internet coverage, one of the companies has provided this coverage, but I say that Russia not contradicting the resolutions. We haven't imposed any additional sanctions towards this country because it's contrary to these resolutions of the Security Council, and neither did we join other sanctions. So we respect the sanctions, and this is in our coherent positions, and we do not violate the sanctions regimes of the UN Security Council resolutions. As for the topic, maybe I can clarify with our experts. Do you have any questions? Yes, please. Yeah, I have another question. As for the joint economic activities in the Kuril Islands, the most important thing, the most difficult thing is the law. And as for the meeting that had taken place, do you have any news regarding that? I have clarified everything that I could, and I will ask your other questions next time. Thank you very much.